thought process. It can be an asset or an issue, especially when things become distorted for us. Therapist Dr. Jonathan Carroll joins us with another good word about some of our mental errors. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Angie.
What are we talking about when we use language like mental errors or thought distortions?
Sure. Well, in my practice, I hear people talk so often, and I have heard myself say this too, about how hard life can feel for us.
Yes. And
sometimes everything feels like a struggle, and people feel like the cards are just stacked against them. And we have three, specifically, there are others, but three kind of very common but not commonly talked about thinking errors that make life feel harder than it needs to be. So in other words, sometimes the difficulty is partly self-inflicted. So these thinking errors in the philosophical world we call fallacies, but they're things that we think that aren't actually true. And it's helpful to get that out there so that we can start to deconstruct it.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are the things that we think that aren't necessarily true, and why do we think them?
Okay, so the first one is the effort to outcome fallacy, which is this actually mistaken belief that the more effort you put into something, the better the result. In reality, putting in more effort doesn't always lead to better outcomes. It can, but it doesn't always. For example, you might stay late at work every single night assuming that it's going to lead to a promotion, but you neglect smarter strategies like skill building or networking. And so doing the same thing, thinking if I work harder, it's going to get better, no pain, no gain, that kind of thing. It doesn't necessarily work out. The key is being more efficient in that example and not just harder working. So sometimes it helps us to understand that thinking a little bit less linearly and trying to practice doing things smarter, work smarter, not harder, that can help. That's fallacy number one. A second one is the status quo bias. And we all know this one. This is a thinking error that makes us cling to familiar situations, even when they aren't serving us well, because we feel safer with what's known. Right. So imagine someone's in a job they don't like, who doesn't apply for a new role because of the fear of what that might bring. Over time, that bias can leave us feeling trapped in situations that prevent us from growth, prevent us from satisfaction. So breaking the bias means challenging our comfort zones and evaluating whether familiar choices are actually the best choices. And then finally, there's the narrative fallacy, which is our human tendency to create very simplified and often negative stories about ourselves based on very limited experiences. We might fail at a task and say, I'm not good enough. A single experience tells me, see, I didn't do it, I couldn't do it, I'm never gonna be good at it. And then we universalize that catastrophic thinking so that we end up creating a story where we believe I was never really good enough to begin with. Effort to outcome fallacy, status quo bias, narrative fallacy, all of them require us to evaluate our beliefs, push past the fear of change, and challenge the negative thinking so that we end up doing better.
It's all so true, Jonathan. I think we can all say, yes, that's me. Yes, that's me. Yes, that's me. Thank you so much for pointing it out to us and giving a voice to those interior ideas and fallacies. Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Thank you, Angie. Take care.
You too. We'll be back with more Lifestyles right after this. Stick around.